kindness.
Welcome.
All righty. So I tell you what we're going to do. I want to start at the beginning, where you were born and how you got into the military, which branch, and if you were drafted or you decided to do this on your own, and also if you had family members that influenced you in any way. I know I'm throwing a lot at you.
No, that's fine. I'm glad we're starting at the beginning because I was born on a farm near Rockwood, Pennsylvania, and the doctor had to come in a sleigh through the snow to deliver me,
So December?
which is interesting.
Were you a December? Or
November.
November.
In Pennsylvania. And I weighed a little over 11 pounds. My mother, I'm the oldest of 7. My mother said I made the way for all the rest.
Yeah, okay. No, I had, my youngest was almost 10 pounds, so yeah, been there. Anyway, go ahead.
So I left the farm. I moved to Marsdale, Pennsylvania, where I spent most of my life till I was 17 years old. At 17, I was a senior in high school and a representative of the Army Map Service at the time. Came to the high school recruiting. And it was such a great offer. And I took the test with a nice architect's ballpoint pen and was offered a job here in Washington. So I took the job. I started working for Army Map Service, took their schools for I think 6 months. And at that point, because we had 12 roommates in two-bedroom apartments, and some of those were sitting up at night seeing green frogs and birds' nests.
Okay.
I decided I didn't want to do this for a living. So I got another job working for the Navy and Navy intelligence, and I really liked it. But there were givens during the Vietnam War for people from the area of southwestern Pennsylvania where I grew up. And that was, you turned 19, you got drafted, you went to Fort Gordon, Georgia for infantry training, and you went to Vietnam. So I considered my options and I delayed enlistment in the Air Force.
Now, Kerry, before you go on, what year are we talking about here?
1966.
1966.
I came to Washington in 1965 after graduation and went in the military in October of 1966.
So you were 19 when you did that, or pretty young?
I actually got my draft notice when I was in basic training. The DI took care of it for me.
Okay, so then, was that it? Then you're off.
In basic training, we were given a choice or a chance to ask what career fields you wanted to go into. I obviously asked for an intelligence career field because I'd worked in it for the Navy, and I got air police. So I went through air police training at Lackland in Texas, San Antonio. After training, you were given a choice of where you would like to go to be stationed. I put in for Andrews because I'm from this area, and got South Korea. So I spent 13 months in South Korea, during which they took the Pueblo, and we went, as they say, ballistic. The base went from 700 to 7,000 in a week.
Now, air police, what, quite frankly, I'm not really familiar with that term. What were your responsibilities? What is, and I know there must have been some particular training, but what is air police? What are you actually doing?
Well, there's actually 2 types of air police, or now they're called security police, but one is security, guarding airplanes, and one is police duties, as you would expect the sheriff's office or the police department here to do. Luckily, because I had all kinds of clearances and could type,
Lucky you.
I got an office job doing security clearances in Korea. So I didn't have to go out in the weather and guard airplanes or shoot anybody. And so I did security clearances the whole time I was in Korea. And I also did safe inspections, where we'd go to all the different organizations and make sure that they had security in their safes and their little canister of stuff they would use if something happened, because that base had been overrun by the Japanese, I believe, during whatever period it was. And as my tour came pretty close to an end in Korea, we were given a choice of the next base we'd like to go to. And all the guys who really knew what they were doing said, you don't want to go back to the States. Try to stay in the Orient if you can. And I said, why? They said, because you're going to get sent to South Dakota, North Dakota, some really choice base to walk around airplanes. And so I said, oh, I really want to go back to Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
I put in for Andrews and got South Dakota. Rapid City, South Dakota, Ellsworth Air Force Base. But again, because of my background, I didn't have to guard airplanes. I had an office job again.
Mm-hmm.
But you still have to carry a weapon and be trained in a weapon. So from Ellsworth, because I really didn't like South Dakota.
Well, some of your buddies kind of told you.
But
you don't have a lot of choice. I know you can put in, but you don't have a lot of choice.
I saw a lot of Mount Rushmore and the Badlands, and they had a stable on base. I did a lot of horseback riding.
Oh, that was... Now, was that new for you, the horseback riding, or you had done that?
I had done that, but not to the extent that I did it in South Dakota. In South Dakota, all the air police would go out in a field and play cowboys and Indians with squirt guns for something to do. That was relaxation, rather than go to Rapid City and hang out in the bars.
Yeah, that's fun. Yeah, I like to ride
but
horses.
I saw a lot of scenery, and I got the opportunity to volunteer for Ranger School and Vietnam. So
Now this is an interesting combination, Ranger School, because you've been pretty much associated with planes and everything.
Right. Ranger School was a new concept.
And this is with the Air Force?
With the Air Force. We had 101st Airborne trainers when I took it, but I put in for both and got Ranger School at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. It was a lot of fun for 6 months with 101st Airborne trainers.
6 months, that's quite a...
The normal Air Force personnel going to Vietnam got like 3 days of survival training. I got 6 months of it. But and a little of the history, because most people didn't know that the Air Force had Rangers.
Right, I always think of Rangers with the Army.
Right. But the Air Force had a concept where they were sending 500-man squadrons through training. So they were a complete unit. You had drivers, cooks, the whole 9 yards, and security. So the first two groups that were trained in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. I was in the third group to be trained, and I went to Fort Campbell in the winter when there was snow. So we trained in the snow and then left directly from Fort Campbell up over the top route to Vietnam immediately. We got on a plane at Fort Campbell and ended up in Vietnam. When we got to Vietnam, they broke us up into 6-man fire teams because we had more training than almost everybody in the Air Force. And I was a senior NCO at the time. So the first 2 months that I was in Vietnam, I worked with the Korean Tiger Division as a liaison NCO, which was wonderful. It was.
And whereabouts in Vietnam were you?
Phu Cat Air Base, which is near Quin Yon. It's pretty far north. We would go to Quin Yon, which was on the ocean, when we got a day off, which wasn't very often. We'd go to the beach. But we were trained in tactics that the Air Force normally didn't have at their disposal. Survival tactics, ambush, and so forth, which are more Marine than Air Force
yes.
normally. But it was probably the best organization that I have ever been in. There wasn't a man in that 500-man squadron that wouldn't have cut their arm off for the commander, because he was an older lieutenant colonel who went through all the training with us. He crawled through the mud the same as we did.
So what were your duties there? What was your day like there?
Base security. We would, I worked all nights. I was on what they called Tiger Flight after I left the Vietnamese compound, or the Korean compound, I'm sorry. The Koreans had a no man's land set up between their base and the American base, and they had a real no man's land with barbed wires and trenches and the whole 9 yards. And you had to get permission to cross that no man's land to go to the Korean compound. They had they called it a rock talk, but it was Republic of Korea Tactical Operations Center, which is a sandbagged bunker that we operated out of. And we just gathered intelligence. The Koreans had, I won't call them infiltrators or spies. They had people in black pajamas out among the population who got the real intelligence. So it was very, very interesting work. And then the next day I would take that information back to the base and turn it over to the U.S. authorities.
What about the danger factor? Were you fairly secure in that area, or how close were you to fire? I'm just wondering, as you're working, are you dodging things, or was it fairly secure?
The Korean compound was probably one of the safest places in Vietnam because of the
Koreans.
No, seriously, because they were serious about the war. And the North Vietnamese totally feared the Koreans. So the Korean base never got hit. But you could see the American base, and you could see the rockets and mortars hitting the American base. And you knew where you didn't want to be. They hit pretty much the same places all the time. They hit the officers' club pool. They hit the NCO club pool. I mean, these are direct hits. They had the coordinates down. They hit the laundry because they wanted you to be miserable. They hit the open-air theater because they didn't want you to enjoy yourself. They never hit the barracks. They would rather not kill people because it creates a burden when they kill people. And it also creates somewhat animosity. So they would rather make you very, very uncomfortable that you were in the war zone, because you could see the rockets and mortars hitting, which I'm going to take a step back. My first night in Vietnam was at Phan Rang Air Force Base, and I was in the first plane that landed. We taxied down the runway, and there were mortars walking right behind us down the runway. So we got off the plane, went in a sandbag bunker the first night, and we had no ammunition because you're not allowed to carry live ammunition on an Air Force plane. So we had rifles but no ammunition. So we spent the first night in a sandbag bunker with the mortars coming in. So safe? No, it was never, ever safe. But then we were sent from Phan Rang to Phuket, and that was the permanent base of the Ranger Group.
Wow. So now, how long was your stay there? Where did you go after that?
I was in Vietnam for 6 months because they were rotating the 4 groups.
And this is like where are we year-wise now?
Um,
Are we at
1969.
69? Okay.
Right. And the people that thought this concept would work had the idea that if you changed patches on your uniform from, I was 823rd to 821st, Vietnamese would assume that it was the same group there, because if you have a constant group, they have better ideas of what is going on.
Okay.
So every 6 months they rotated those four squadrons of Rangers. And so then we flew from Vietnam back to our home base, which was in England Air Force Base, Louisiana. I learned to say Louisiana. I learned real quick to say Louisiana. So they, by then, had decided that the concept wasn't working all that well, and we would be given our base of choice from Louisiana to our, you could pick a base again, and I was kind of worried about that. But I asked for Andrews and got it.
Well, all right.
I spent my last 9 months at Andrews, excuse me, as a desk sergeant, and it was probably the worst tour of any that I had in 4 years, because at Andrews, when a VIP flies in, you've got to close down the base, and everybody hates you. So they really at that point didn't know what to do with me. So they allowed me to get my base of choice and be a desk sergeant for the last 9 months.
All right. Now, what rank were you again when you left the?
Well, they've changed this several times during my tenure. When I first went in the military, a E4 was an airman first class. When it changed, I was an E4 after 2 years of my 4 years. They called me a sergeant. I was an NCO at that point as an E4. I spent 2 years as an E4 and got out as an E4. They offered me staff sergeant to re-enlist. I was like, I had a government job waiting for me because I had worked for the federal government before I went in, and they had to provide a civil service job for me. And I went to work for the Navy again, and spent some time in the Pentagon. I moved around quite a bit. I worked in the Pentagon for Defense Supply. I worked for the Navy at the Navy Yard.
And you're still you're a young man still. You're in your 20s, I'm assuming, during this time.
Yes, I was in my early 20s, and so I went back to work for the federal government, and changed career fields several times, became a federal contracting officer, and that's when I was approached by a Navy chief when I was working at Ballston in Arlington, who said, "Kerry, let's go down to the cafeteria. I'd like to talk to you." And we went down to the cafeteria, and he said,
"Those kinds of conversations always lead to something."
"Yeah, why does he want me to go down to the cafeteria?" I'd already been through a lot of this and questioned why did I have security clearance and I was so young and all this kind of stuff. So he said, "Kerry, you've been in Vietnam, right?" I said, "Yes, sir, I have." He said, "How would you like to go back to Vietnam?" Well, and the tears stopped streaming down my face. He knew the answer, what I was going to say, and he said, "Well, now, hold on. Listen to me. I can guarantee you a 2-grade raise, 25% cost of living, and housing allowance. Does that sound a little better?" I said, "Sounds better than the first time." Much better than the first time. So he Said, well, think it over. Don't answer yet. Think it over till tomorrow, and we'll talk again. So I went home. I called my parents, who had the same reaction. You've got to be kidding. You're going to go back to Vietnam. I said, well, really, I'm thinking about it. Would you store my car for me if I do this? Because I had a little 63 Buick convertible that I really, really liked. And so they said they would if that's really what I wanted to do. And I talked to my landlord, who was more than glad to let me out of the lease because the rent went up the next day. And 2 weeks later, because the embassy in Saigon arranged everything, they got my passport, tickets. All I had to do was show up. They handed me a passport, and I was on my way to Saigon. Got there, they put me up in a really nice hotel that overlooked the presidential palace in Saigon. It was really nice. Even though there was a war going on, it wasn't directly affecting Saigon at that time. So I stayed in Saigon for 13 months, or 18 months.
Now, what were your responsibilities there? What was your job when you went back to Saigon?
I worked for the embassy at the defense attache's office, which I really didn't understand when I'd show somebody my ID card, the Vietnamese particularly. It says DAO, which means something in Vietnamese other than defense attache's office. And they just kind of sat back. I didn't realize how much covert operation was going on. The CIA had an office just down the hall from mine. But I handled basically classified information, access to that classified information. People would have to come in and show their identification in order to see the intelligence. And it was strange because a lot of times they'd say, which one do you want to see? They'd have military, CIA, defense attaché, whatever ID you'd want to see, they'd have it.
Were you I'm assuming joining an existing staff there?
Yes. Yes, they had people that had been there for years, and people who wanted to stay there for years more, and would probably still be there if Saigon hadn't fallen. I had some friends who were still there when Saigon fell, and they barely got their families out. I had a real good friend who was the station manager for Flying Tiger Airlines, and he told all his employees to be out at the airport at a certain time in the morning, and he would get them out of Vietnam because everything was going downhill. The ordnance was already coming in. And he got a plane, his employees got on. He was standing out on the stairwell trying to keep the Vietnamese police from getting in the plane. The airport would not give him permission to take off, and he did anyway. So I haven't seen him since, but I have an awful lot of respect for him, that he looked out for his employees to make sure that they got out.
Now, you said this, it sounds like this office was fairly secure, but did you see any fighting while you were there in Saigon? You said that the war was going on, but it seems like you were...
Not actual combat, no, because I stayed pretty much in Saigon. Towards the last, I had my own house in Saigon that had its own guards, and I probably shouldn't have that. A maid came with a house, an elderly woman who could really cook well, and it was luxury living. A car would come pick me up in the morning and take me to work. I ended up buying a motorcycle and driving that to work. But it was not traumatic until kind of towards the end. Like I said, I have a lot of friends who just barely got their families out. I connected with a friend the other day on Facebook, and I don't use Facebook, but my daughter put me on there. And he saw my name. He was at the embassy with me, and I haven't seen him since 1974. And we've been kind of conversing on Facebook.
Well, there you go.
He's a little older and a little grayer, but so am I.
So then how long was your stay there in Saigon? And then what, you were there for, when you, I thought you said you were going to be there for 13 months
I
or
could
so?
have stayed there almost
Indefinitely.
indefinitely, but my boss in the contracts office kept writing me and saying how much I was missed and when was I coming back, and my family was doing the same thing. And so I kind of felt the need to leave. It wasn't because of anything that was happening there, but I really wanted to get back. I had a job waiting for me. They wanted me back in the worst kind of way. Contracting officer is kind of a very, very limited field. Not a lot of people want to do it. And as I was retiring, I had a person who had worked for me in the Pentagon as a GS5 call me and say, "Kerry, I hear you're retiring." I mean, word gets around real quick. Mm-hmm. And he said, "I hear you're retiring. How would you like to work for me?" I said, "Well, I can't talk to you now. I'm still working for the federal government. But tell me about your job." He said, "I'm a private contractor. I worked my way up to SES in the federal government, and it was so boring that I got out and started my own company, small company business. And I am hiring contracting officers for the federal government, which is completely insane. You have to have an independent choice. You cannot work for a contractor and be a federal contracting officer. It's impossible. You can't do it." But at any rate, he offered me the job, and most people in my career field at that time got out of the federal government on Friday and went to work for a contractor on Monday, because it's a very needed and limited field. And he said, "You know, I can offer you $90,000 a year, because that's what we're starting our junior contracting officers as. And you're a senior contracting officer." I spent 29 years as a federal contracting officer. Every time I went to a class, they'd say, "Well, the normal contracting officer burns out after about 10 years. And I thought, either I'm doing something very right or very wrong here. It's time for a career change. But he said, "Well, are you interested at all?" I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, I have one question for you. Would I have to commute?" Because I was commuting into the district every day. Mm-hmm. And then I started commuting to Fairfax. But he said, "Yes, you would have to commute." And I said, "No, I'm not a bit interested, but what I can do, I have a listserv of 1,100 contracting officers that went through training that I've gone through, and I will furnish that list to you if that will help you. But I will tell you up front, most of the senior contracting officers are my age, they're baby boomers, and they don't want to do it anymore. They've had enough, they just don't want to do it." Mm-hmm. He said, "Well, that would help me a lot." I never got any results from that, whether he hired anybody or what actually happened from that little venture that he had started. But it was very interesting. I had a guard and maintenance contract at Arlington National Cemetery, which was very interesting. I bought all the vehicles for the top 10 DOD officials as a contracting officer, which was really exciting. You find out a lot about people when you're at that level. If the Secretary of the Air Force would have offered a pink Cadillac or ordered a pink Cadillac, all the rest of them would have wanted a pink Cadillac. It's just the way it is. But at any rate, I changed careers. became a program manager with the Native Americans
Oh my, that's interesting.
for the last 4 years that I worked for the federal government. And I was the national program manager, so I could go to any reservation in the U.S. And talk to them about providing a set of telecommunications, because 80% of Native Americans don't have basic telephone service out on the reservations. More than that percentage are below the poverty line. One of the presidents went out there to present a Native American girl with an award because she won an essay contest, and when he got there he found out there was no electricity. So this was some of the most rewarding part of my career, that you could see the results, that the people appreciated what you were doing. It took almost a year before the Native Americans would talk to me, because obviously I'm not Native Americans, but I, the last year grew a ponytail because I couldn't do it in the military. That was not allowed in the military. I had a beard. I'm a veteran. I was hunting and fishing at that time, and I was an elder. So, and I really liked being able to go to work in khakis and a denim shirt. I didn't have to wear a tie to go out and talk to the Native Americans. So it was a really, really rewarding job.
What was high point for you for your military service when you were there? I mean, there maybe were several, but if there's any that really stand out.
Being in the Ranger organization, the camaraderie, the closeness, that there wasn't a man in that 500-man squadron that wouldn't die for his brothers. And, excuse me, but that was the high point. So,
What were low points?
being at Andrews. Being at Andrews for 9 months. And it's just a very strange place, and it's even stranger now because I guess they call it Joint Base Andrews. They have more than one military organization there. So it was different, and if I had to be there, which I did, being a desk sergeant was one of the better jobs at the time. It's really funny because on, and I won't mention the news channel, one of the news channels, the weatherman, was a junior airman on the flight that I was a desk sergeant. And it's kind of strange to figure out how he went from security police to Prince George's County Police to being a weatherman. But he is a very good weatherman. He is a very, very good weatherman, and he was a excellent airman. His claim to fame was that there was a speeding car trying to get off the base through a gate, and he stepped out of the gate shack and leveled his weapon, and the car stopped. I think personally I'd have let him go.
Oh, I know that you're very proud of your military service. So if you were in front of an audience of young people, would you recommend military service, or what sort of sentiment would you share with that group?
I have to say absolutely, and I already have many times. There's a young, I'm on the VFW Honor Guard, which again I consider a service. There's a young airman stationed at Andrews, and I noticed that he was wearing a security police logo on his uniform. Sometimes we get Honor Guard from the military services, but it's usually, I'm on the shooting team, and they don't have their own shooting team. So I started talking to the young man about his career and how he liked it. He loves it. Most security policemen aren't real crazy about it. They never wanted to be in law enforcement. Of course, when they get out, they have a career waiting for them.
Sure.
And he said, "Sir, because they ask everybody pretty much when they got out of the service. And most people had spent a whole career in the service. I said, "Sir, when did you get out of the military?" I said, "1970. He just kind of stepped back. And he said, "That long?" I said, "Yes. At that time, with the Vietnam War going on, you knew that you either had to make a choice or get drafted. And I made a choice. I enlisted, and it was a good choice. I would recommend it to anybody. I have a younger brother who is a helicopter pilot. I have a sister. I'm the oldest of 7.
I remember you mentioned that.
I have a sister who was in the military, where she met her husband, who was also in the military. And I'm pretty much from a military family. My grandfather was in World War I. My father was in World War II. And of course I was in Vietnam. So anyway, the young man said, "Sir, is there any chance that I could ever fire your rifle?" I said, "I'll have to check on that one. I'm not quite sure of that. But I will check." And actually he can. He would be allowed to. But you don't see the same people on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
We have Marine, Honor Guard, Navy. We periodically have Army. But we're pretty constant. We're there all the time.
No, I think this is a really fascinating career that you had, because you were in and then you got out and then you ended up back there.
Yeah, and I moved. I think I was lucky to have moved around for 4 years rather than being stationed in one place for 4 years. I saw a lot of different places, some of which I would prefer not to see, but I think I was lucky to move around for 4 years. It was, I think, a good career move, and I knew that I had a longer career in civil service. I actually ended up, including my military service, working for 39 years for the federal government.
Long time.
And retired 12 years ago, and I'm enjoying life.
Enjoying life, of course, for sure. You mentioned that one of your grandchildren had connected you on Facebook to an older. Do you still maintain friendships with any of those that you served with?
I hadn't, because I hadn't seen most of them. Well, some from 1970, several from 1974. So that's a long time, and it was just really, really strange that we connected on Facebook, because I very rarely look at Facebook. My daughter talked me into a intelligent phone.
Okay.
It's more intelligent than I am, and she put me on Facebook. That I get a lot of messages that I can just read the message and delete it. But I got one from him, and we connected, and he's out in California with his family. He looks like he has a lot of grandchildren. He married a young Vietnamese lady, and it looks like he has a lot of grandchildren, probably great-grandchildren. I haven't gotten quite there yet. I've got a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 6-year-old, so I haven't quite gotten to the grandchildren.
Well, before we wrap this interview up, is there any parting comments you'd like to share?
I commend you for this program. I think it's wonderful. I think it's a great opportunity for veterans, because veterans, I won't say are shy, but very seldom share their experiences.
I have found that to be true. I'm married to one, so yeah.
Well, my grandfather, if I may
Absolutely.
kind of go back a step here, My grandfather in World War I could speak fluent German, and High German, and Pennsylvania Dutch, because I'm obviously from Pennsylvania. So he was a interpreter, a prisoner, they call them chasers, but a prisoner guard with the German prisoners. He once mentioned that most of the soldiers really didn't want to be there, the German soldiers either. Of course, it was trench warfare, and he pretty much explained that he was a good shot. He was a country boy from Pennsylvania. And I think that pretty much helped me in my career, because I learned to shoot from him, from my grandfather, when I was 10 years old. So, I mean, I really believe that that helped me survive. But my father was a medic in World War II.
Now, was he Army or?
He was Army.
He was Army.
An Army medic. And the only thing that he ever talked about, and not very much about that, was that when he was in France, he somehow obtained an M1 carbine and was shooting rabbits for fresh meat. They were going to court-martial him because medics aren't allowed to carry firearms. You can wear a big red cross, but you can't carry a firearm or eat fresh meat, apparently. But he rarely talked about it, nor did my grandfather. And so there's not a lot of sharing going on. I really, really enjoy talking to Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, George is one of the few, remaining World War II, because most of those gentlemen are in their early 90s now.
We had one World War II veteran pass away a couple months ago. I went to the funeral, and there were things about him that I didn't know. I didn't know that he had made 57 or 59 jumps behind enemy lines. That's pretty impressive. Just jumping out of a plane's impressive. I had to do a little of that.
Yeah, we talked to a vet recently who was a fighter pilot in World War II, and then the helicopters were introduced, and he ended up, kind of with those MASH units. So fascinating. When you listen to some of these stories, you wonder how some of these fellows made it home. You know? So.
Well, we have a service officer that was shot down 5 times. He was a helicopter pilot, and he is convalescing right now because he had back surgery. But his X-ray looks like an erector set with all the pins and screws and rods. It's pretty horrible. I can just kind of imagine the pain. But there again, he's never really, other than saying he got shot down 5 times, said anything more. So, my grandkids asked me if I had to eat bugs. Yes. We didn't get fed very well during Ranger training. There were a couple days when you didn't get fed at all unless you found something good to eat.
Well, this has been an honor conversing with you this afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Well, I truly enjoyed it, and I missed one of the items that the Native Americans liked about me. They said, "You've got to be Native American. You like to tell stories."
Well, again, thank you, Kerry. And thank you to our viewers out there. Again, I'm Anita Sherman with the Culpeper Times. Join us for more of these interviews. You can see them on Culpeper Media Network. War Veterans, History of Our Heroes.